Blessings, guys. In today's video I will be sharing with you a rather interesting part of Jamaica's history, rather unknown and interesting. Now this is the Montego Bay Rebellion of 1902. Yeah, the Montego Bay Rebellion of 1902. I know a lot of persons have not heard about this story, so I will be making it interesting, trying to put it in story form and all of that. I will be trying to do a lot of these videos, tidbits of Jamaican history, unknown history of Jamaica in the future, so please sit back, relax and try to enjoy this one and give me your feedback, guys. All right, blessings. Thanks again for joining. Enjoy the video. At midnight on April 5th, 1902, after walking home from dinner with Dr. Bill Farquharson, the district medical officer, Police Inspector Herbert Thomas received this urgent telegram from Sergeant Major Phillips in Montego Bay. Inspector Thomas took the message seriously and decided to make the 25-mile journey from Lucy to Montego Bay. Inspector Thomas located Sergeant Major Johnson, who agreed to use his Parry cart, a two-wheeled vehicle not much larger than a wheelbarrow, and the two men set off carrying carbines with bayonets, 20 rounds of ball cartridge, and some clothes. Inspector Thomas and Sergeant Major Johnson arrived at the Montego Bay police station close to 4 a.m. Sunday morning, April 6, 1902. Like the calm after a storm, it was early quiet. The station's broken window panes and the many bricks, stones, conch shells and bottles scattered in the station's courtyard spoke of earlier chaos. Inspector Thomas hurried inside to assure himself of the safety of Montego Bay's Sergeant Major and constables. All reported that they were fine, if a bit shaken up. Inspector Thomas was informed that the unrest began late in the afternoon of Friday, April 5th, when a drunken sailor named Cooper was arrested for disorderly conduct close to 5 p.m., and the two women who were with him were treated badly by the arresting officer. The arresting officer was attacked by a group of roughs, friends of Cooper's from the docks. Some 2,000 others turned up at the courthouse and began to hail stones down at the windows. Sergeant Major's home was attacked and his wife and children were forced to flee for their lives. The police eventually released Cooper, but the rioters were not appeased. Police on beat duty were attacked, as was police guard room at the courthouse where Sergeant Major Phillips was stationed, attempting to hold off the crowd with his revolver. He was eventually forced to retreat into the police station after firing a shot into the crowd that wounded one of the attackers. At that point, the crowd advanced on the courthouse guard room and destroyed everything in sight. They then turned their attention to the police station. All subsequent arrests were also released and the custos addressed the people. Rioting ceased for the night, and not believing the worst to be over, Sergeant Major Phillips began to send telegraphs calling for reinforcements. Inspector Thomas and Sergeant Major Johnson were among the first to arrive. At that point, satisfied that he had been brought to speed, Inspector Thomas took an early morning stroll around Montego Bay to see for himself that calm prevailed before returning to the station for a short nap. Later that morning, more reinforcements arrived so that in addition to the town's regular police force, Montego Bay boasted the presence of the Inspector General, 3 inspectors, a sergeant major, and 60 armed men. Upon arrival at the railway station, however, the reinforcements got an indication of what they would be up against, as they were greeted by a confident crowd of close to 1,500, many of whom were said to have remarked, "Cho, that's not half enough for us tonight." Some of the inspectors, including Herbert Thomas of Lucy, began to suspect that what happened the night before was only a small taste of what was to come. Others, including the Inspector General, convinced themselves that the worst was over and that order would be maintained. All remained quiet during the day and church services proceeded smoothly. Adjutant Simons of the Salvation Army, who worked amongst the poor in the community, took it upon himself to address the crowd that had begun to gather once again. Although he is said to have been attempting to place himself over the crowd in the hope of diverting attention from the police, he staged a march to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers. When loud roars and bugle calls could be heard approaching the town center, Inspector Thomas was ordered to investigate. He wound up walking towards a mob of some 2,000 angry people and promptly took refuge in the police station, arriving there only a few minutes before the mob. The marchers managed to again attack the police officers on beat, rain attacks on the police barracks, and even assault the Inspector General. Police whistles added to the din of angry voices. Stones began to fly, and many of the police officers on duty in front of the station were wounded. Forced to retreat inside and regroup, Inspector Thomas remembers, finding that some of the men had begun to fix their bayonets, I immediately ordered them to desist and showed them how to use the butt end of the carbine. By this time, I had unlocked the big gate, which was used to allow vehicles to enter the yard, and I suddenly flung it open, taking the mob completely by surprise and charging right into the heart of it with butts of the carbines. The streets were immediately strewn with the wounded and the crowd temporarily dispersed, as quoted in Block 1984, page 38. By the time Inspector General arrived at the police station, his white jacket stained with blood and his arm hanging limply at his side, 20 men had been wounded, some seriously, including Inspector O'Toole of Falmouth, who had been carried in unconscious due to a blow on his temple from a brick. The Inspector General, who knew he had barely escaped with his life, ordered Inspector Thomas to gather all police constables who were able to arm the party to clear the streets and town square, firing if necessary. Thomas did as he was told. The street, he remembered, was so strewn with missiles of various kinds, which were also rained upon us as we marched along, that men were tripping and falling every 3 or 4 yards. And we did not dare leave any of them on the road, or they would have surely perished at the hands of the mob. Seeing no prospect of otherwise putting an end to the disturbance, and as our numbers were being steadily depleted by casualties, I myself being the only officer not yet disabled, I gave the order for independent firing. That means fire at will. Some 25 shots were fired altogether, and the effect was magical. The mob, many of whom believed that blank cartridges were being used, were stunned when the bullets began to fly. Within 3 minutes, Thomas noted, the square was clear, while a terrified silence prevailed. The Montego Bay riots had ended, but the security forces were taking no chances. On Monday, April 7th, the HMS Tribune docked in Montego Bay from Port Royal, thereby increasing Montego Bay's peacekeeping force to 750 armed men. The acting governor, Mr. and later Lord Oliver, also arrived by special train, as did a company of the West India Regiment. A reinforcement of 100 police had also been sent to replace the wounded. Of the 4 officers and 70 other ranks engaged, police casualties were upwards of 50% of their numbers. 2 of the rioters lost their lives and some 24 were injured. A meeting of the Privy Council was held and a commission appointed to investigate the entire affair. Not since Morant Bay has there been such a rising against constituted authority, claimed the Daily Telegraph newspaper. The commission's conclusion was that the riots were as a result of hostility to the police. Inspector Thomas of the Lucy police station believed they were related to a tightening of police control after years of laxity, because Montego Bay, lightly policed and suffering from high rates of unemployment, had become the most rowdy and disorderly town in the island. Yet the Jamaica Advocate, editorializing on the events of April 5 to 7, 1902, placed the blame for the riots on the government's recently instituted land taxation policy in its attempt to deal with a severe economic depression. Chronic irritation and discontent, which have for some time existed among the poorer classes as the consequence of the grinding, crushing weight of the takes of which they are unable to pay, and the prosecutions which have been recently instituted against them for not being able to pay, as cited in Bryan, 1991, page 274. About a week or so before the riots, there had been many attempts to collect taxes. Many had been brought before the resident magistrate for non-payment. Many also objected to the manner in which they were treated concerning the payment of taxes, often arrested or threatened rather than summoned and unable to pay and unwilling to go to prison. The aftermath, the Inspector General was made a commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George and also received a large cash sum. However, he died 6 months later while on leave in England, most likely as a result of the wounds he sustained in Montego Bay. A few other inspectors received large sums of money. In a move that foreshadowed happenings during another set of April riots, almost 100 years later, the gas riots of Kingston of April 1999, the government, alarmed by all that had taken place, decided to put tax proposal on hold for at least a year. History, it seems, does have a way of representing itself.
Good evening. A week ago tonight, the home of an American diplomat in Jamaica was bombed and sprayed with machine gun fire. The diplomat had been identified in an American magazine as a purported CIA agent.
Today's video is gonna be a little bit different. As you know, on this channel, I try to cover different areas of Jamaican history. Another thing about today's upload is that there are no images available for the events in this video. But I'm gonna try to work with what I have. So like the video and let's proceed. This is the story of Louis G. D'Antoni, the CIA officer whose mission in Jamaica turned deadly. Today we delve into the murky waters of espionage, political violence, and a firebombing that rocked Jamaica during its most turbulent elections. On October 23, 1980, an explosion ripped through the upscale community of Norbrook in Kingston, Jamaica, targeting the home of a CIA officer. But who was behind this attack? And what secrets were they trying to keep buried? Stay tuned as we unravel the chilling tale of Louis G. D'Antoni and the shadowy world of espionage in Jamaica. So, first, who was Louis G. D'Antoni? Louis G. D'Antoni was not just any diplomat. He was a seasoned CIA officer embedded in the US Embassy in Kingston, Jamaica. Known for his intelligence and discretion, D'Antoni was tasked with monitoring and influencing the political landscape of Jamaica during one of its most volatile periods. He was married with children, leading a seemingly normal life. But behind the facade was a man deeply involved in Cold War espionage. Arrival in Jamaica. D'Antoni arrived in Jamaica in the late 1970s, during a period of intense political strife. The Cold War shadow loomed large, with the US keen to counter Soviet influence in the Caribbean. Jamaica's 1980 elections were a critical juncture, with the socialist-leaning People's National Party (PNP) led by Michael Manley and the pro-Western and more conservative Jamaica Labour Party (JLP) led by Edward Seaga. D'Antoni's mission was clear: to ensure that Jamaica did not fall into the Soviet sphere of influence. The political landscape. Jamaica in the 1980s was a battleground, both politically and literally. The elections saw rampant violence, with paramilitary groups and political gangs terrorizing communities. The PNP and JLP were not just rivals, they were enemies in a deadly struggle for power. For D'Antoni, this environment was both a challenge and an opportunity to sway the political outcome in favor of US interests. As the election date of October 30, 1980 approached, the violence in Kingston escalated. Reports of politically motivated killings and firebombings became daily news. D'Antoni, though maintaining a low profile, was deeply involved in intelligence activities. He had been meeting with various political figures, gathering information, and perhaps even funneling support to certain factions. October 23, 1980, the night of the attacks. On the night of October 23, 1980, Louis G. D'Antoni's residence in the affluent Norbrook neighborhood was the target of a meticulously planned attack. Under the cover of darkness, assailants launched a firebomb, causing a massive explosion. And it was also alleged that the house was shut up. The blast was heard miles away, and flames quickly engulfed the house. D'Antoni and his family, however, narrowly escaped, their home totally destroyed. In the immediate aftermath, the narrative spun by various factions was rife with accusations and conspiracy theories. The PNP accused the JLP of orchestrating the attack to intimidate foreign observers and disrupt the electoral process. The JLP, on the other hand, insinuated that radical elements within the PNP or even Cuban operatives might have been responsible, aiming to drive a wedge between Jamaica and the United States. Investigations and accusations. The US government responded swiftly, sending a high-level team to investigate. The presence of CIA operatives among the investigators hinted at the deeper espionage ties. The investigation revealed that the attack was sophisticated, involving timed explosives and detailed knowledge of D'Antoni's security arrangements. Some insiders suggested that D'Antoni's activities had made him a target, as he was reportedly involved in covert operations to support anti-PNP factions, funneling money and resources to ensure a JLP victory. This narrative was bolstered by reports of clandestine meetings and intercepted communications. The firebombing exacerbated the already volatile political climate. Michael Manley and the PNP used the incident to decry foreign interference and call for a greater scrutiny of US activities in Jamaica. Edward Seaga and the Jamaica Labour Party countered with claims of communist subversion and the need for strong ties with the West. The incident deepened the divisions within the Jamaican society, with both parties leveraging it for political gain. The US Embassy in Jamaica tightened security, with fears of further attacks on American personnel. The incident prompted a re-evaluation of US diplomatic and intelligence strategies in the region. The firebombing of D'Antoni's residence became a case study in the risks of covert operations and the volatile nature of Cold War geopolitics. Despite the violence, however, the elections proceeded on October 30, 1980, resulting in a victory for the JLP and Edward Seaga. The aftermath saw a relative calming of tensions, but the scars of the firebombing and the broader election violence left a lasting impact. For D'Antoni, the incident marked the end of his mission in Jamaica, but the questions and the controversies surrounding the attack lingered. The firebombing of Louis G. D'Antoni's residence is a dark chapter in the annals of Cold War espionage and political violence. It highlights the dangerous interplay of local and international politics and the lengths to which factions will go to secure power. In this video, we're going to take a look at a heartless and scandalous incident that happened in Jamaica in 1999, when 39 homeless and mentally ill people were kidnapped from the streets of Montego Bay and dumped near a mud lake in rural St. Elizabeth. But how did these are harassed by society and the authorities? In 1999, the situation reached a breaking point when the Jamaican government at the time decided to clean up the city of Montego Bay for a visit by then US President Bill Clinton. On the night of May 22, 1999, 39 homeless and mentally ill people were rounded up by city officials and police officers and were forced into a truck. They were told that they were being taken to a shelter, a hospital, or a medication center. But instead, they were driven for over 2 hours to a remote area near a mud lake in St. Elizabeth and left there to fend for themselves. Some of them had their hands tied with ropes, and some of them were injured or bleeding. They had no food, water, or clothing, and they had to face the dangers of the dark, the cold, the mud, and the wildlife. The next morning, some of the victims managed to find their way to the nearest town, Santa Cruz, where they were spotted by local residents and journalists. They told their stories of horror and abuse and exposed the scandal to the public. The media dubbed them the Mobe 39, and their plight sparked outrage and sympathy across the country and the world. So here are some of the stories of the Mobe 39 that we found so far. Vernon Gibson was a veteran of the US Army who saw combat in Vietnam. He was one of the survivors who managed to avoid running down a slope into the dark, which could have led him to the mud lake. He raised his hand and said, "Don't move, make we wait until daylight." When day broke, they realized they were almost at the edge of the mud lake. Another homeless person, Whitley Findlater, was another survivor who was told to get into the truck as he was being taken to get medication. He noticed there were over 25 other people in the truck with their hands tied with rope. Later, they tied up his hands also, saying he would jump out of the truck, so he sat down. A mentally ill person who was not named was found wandering on the streets of Santa Cruz, covered in mud and blood. He said he had been taken from Montego Bay by men in a truck and left near a mud lake. He said he had to fight off crocodiles and other animals to survive. He was taken to the hospital by a good Samaritan. A woman who was also not named was found in a state of shock and trauma near the mud lake. She said she had been sleeping on the streets of Montego Bay when she was grabbed by men in a truck and dumped near the lake. She said she had no idea where she was or how to get back to Montego Bay. She was also taken to the hospital by a good Samaritan. These are just some of the stories of the 39 people who were kidnapped and dumped near a mud lake in rural St. Elizabeth. It was a scandalous incident that violated the human rights of the homeless and mentally ill people in Montego Bay. The Jamaican government, led by Prime Minister P.J. Patterson at the time, later accepted responsibility for the incident and compensated the victims with a monthly stipend of a measly 1,500 Jamaican dollars, or about $20 US. The city officials and police officers involved were suspended, but no criminal charges were filed against them. The incident also prompted the government to launch a national program to address the issue of homelessness and mental health, and to provide more shelters, clinics, and social workers for the needy. However, more than 2 decades later, the problem of homelessness and mental health in Jamaica remains unsolved. Many of the Mobe 39 are still living on the streets, or have died from illness, violence, or neglect. Some of them have never received their compensation, or have lost it to theft or corruption. Many of them still suffer from the trauma and the stigma of the incident, and have not received any counseling or support. And some of them have never been reunited with their families or friends, who may not even know what had happened to them. The story of the Mobe 39 is a tragic and shameful chapter in the history of Jamaica. It reveals the harsh realities and injustices that many homeless and mentally ill people face in the country and around the world. It challenges us to question our attitudes and actions towards the most vulnerable and marginalized members of our society. How do we treat them? How do we help them? And how do we respect their dignity and rights? I hope that this video has shed some light on this important and overlooked topic, and has inspired you to learn more and perhaps to get involved in helping the marginalized and less able in our society. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to get notified when I upload new videos. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please leave them below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time on Elite Jamaica. courthouse filled with white planters and judges is surrounded by a mob of hundreds of black laborers and set ablaze. A white flag calling for peace is put out, at which the people scoff. Anyone trying to flee is hacked to pieces. In the end, 25 people are dead, including 18 justices, magistrates, and volunteer guards from inside the courthouse, and another 31 people are injured. But what could possibly have enraged this mob to the point that they would massacre a group of local politicians and innocent people in such a horrific manner? The causes go much deeper than the simple explanation offered by the colonial government. A mob rescuing a fellow black man who was charged with trespassing on an abandoned plantation. The origins of what took place on October 11, 1865 are much larger than any single event that immediately preceded the Morant Bay Rebellion. They included years of neglect by a government that by no means represented the masses of former African slaves, an economy that was sliding out of control, leading to enormous unemployment rates, and high prices of any imported food or clothing, which left people practically nude or starving in every city and town on the entire island of Jamaica. All these causes, directly or indirectly, led to the violence that spread out of control in the once quiet town of Morant Bay. A government must have the ability to care for the governed masses through institutions such as healthcare and to manage the economy in such a responsible manner that benefits not only the upper classes but the entire populace. 2. A democratic government must represent the people it is attempting to govern. In Jamaica at the time, none of the above were true. In Jamaica, the population ratio of blacks to white was 32-1 at the time of the elections in 1864. Yet out of a population of over 436,000, fewer than 2,000 were eligible to vote, and those were almost exclusively white, due in part to a large voting fee that blacks had to pay in order to participate. As one observer stated, they possess no effectual voice in the making of laws which touch their interests. George William Gordon, a wealthy son of a white planter and slave woman, was elected to House of Assembly in 1865 as an advocate for the impoverished blacks in Jamaica. The now infamous Governor Edward Eyre publicly denounced him as the most consistent and untiring obstructor of the public business in the House of Assembly. Gordon shot back, saying of Eyre, "He is devoid of justice and humanity." Gordon's disgust for Eyre policies can be seen when he stresses in a letter to a friend, he will not admit reforms. There is fast being created a second bondage in Jamaica. Gordon had perceived not only the deteriorating state of Irish government on the island, but also the poor slave-like conditions in which the masses of emancipated blacks lived. Even the most basic institutions such as hospitals or housing for the old and poor were neglected. There were reports from bishops and charitable Samaritans that poor houses, void of doors and windows, were filled with dying people who would lie on the floors without food or water. The dead would go unburied, sometimes for days at a time. When the government had so little respect or care for the people, the disregarded masses would rise up at the slightest provocation against any figures of authority. And that is exactly what happened at Morant Bay. For years, the populace had been overtaxed. Yet when a recession hit the entire island of Jamaica, the government did nothing to ease the pain of the people. As the prices of imports, such as food and clothing, exploded due to the extraordinarily high tariffs and the loss of American suppliers and markets due to the American Civil War, the government turned a blind eye. Then when a drought struck from 1864 to 65, the people could no longer even continue with their meager subsistence farming, which had just barely been keeping them alive, and the sugar crop was decimated, putting many more people out of work. Of a population of over 400,000, only an estimated 60,000 blacks were employed, while as many as 130,000 capable adults went jobless. It would be only a matter of time until these people became fed up with their condition and acted on their own against the authorities who were doing nothing to improve their miserable states of being. Edward Underhill, a Baptist missionary who had been working to help the common people, wrote a letter to the British Secretary of State for the Colonies describing the extreme poverty of the people, which was proved by the ragged and even naked condition of the vast numbers of them. To make the whole situation worse, large numbers of coolies or Asian or African indentured servants were brought in to replace the former slaves. This was due to the belief that servants would work harder because they had their freedom to work toward, while the ex-slaves were slothful and ungrateful for their emancipation. One planter remarked, "Work is freely offered, but not easily obtained, owing to the increase in idleness of the Creoles. Were it otherwise, African immigrants would not even been sought after and obtained." Underhill suggested that a survey be handed out to all the parishes on the island to establish what the true state of the people was. The result was a list of appalling conditions under which many Jamaicans lived. As a list of their reasons for poverty and distress by the Baptist minister, Thomas Lear: want of work, want of rain, want of industry, unreasonable demands in some instances as to work, and also unpunctual payment on the part of some planters, high prices of and exorbitant duties on the articles of which the poor consume. When the Underhill survey was complete, a meeting held in the colonial capital of Spanish Town adopted a resolution that deplores the present depressed state of the inhabitants of this colony, who were suffering from the injustice done to them by the legislator. In April, an humble petition of the poor people of Jamaica and the parish of St. Ann, as it was called, was sent to the Queen of England, in which the people meekly asked the Queen and the colonial office for some sort of relief from the heavy taxation which the colonial government was assessing them. They also asked for the crown to lease them land at low rates so they could put their hands on earth to work and cultivate. The response, however, enraged the people. It stated, "The prosperity of the laboring class depends upon their working for wages, steadily and continuously, at times when their labor is wanted, and for so long as it is wanted." This blamed Jamaican blacks for their own condition. In July of 1865, Governor Irie had 50,000 copies of this document circulated to all parts of Jamaica. It became known as the Queen's Advice. Soon, the irritation of the people was visible, and certain ministers and missionaries refused to pass copies of the advice on for fear of further enraging the populace. Yet, the stage had already been set, and only a small incident was needed to turn quiet bickering amongst peasants into a massacre that would change the way the colony had been brutally run. That incident occurred on October 7, 1865, when a court session held in the eastern town of Morant Bay charged a poor black man accused of trespassing on a long-abandoned plantation. A band of blacks from the small village of Stony Gut, about 4 miles away, entered the town of Morant Bay, armed with bludgeons, protesting demands and just detention. When one of the band was arrested, the group became unruly and attacked the police, freeing the man from custody. 2 days later, the magistrates ordered 28 people detained for questioning. Yet when the police entered the village of Stony Gut, they were surrounded by hundreds of poor blacks and handcuffed. Here, Paul Bogle, one of the respected leaders of the peasants in the area, wrote a petition to the governor and declared that an outrageous assault was committed upon them by the policemen of that parish, by orders of the justice, of which they were compelled to resist. The next day, October 11, as many as 500 blacks entered Morant Bay columns, blowing horns and carrying flags. They were armed with cutlasses, sharpened sticks, and a few older guns. One man was heard chanting, "We will kill every white and mulatto man in the bay, and when we finish, we will return and go to the estates." They soon confronted a hastily put-together volunteer militia of not more than 30 men guarding the courthouse. Verbal bickering turned to a projectile throwing, until the mob actually moved in and tried to overrun the militia, at which time the order to fire was given. 7 members of the mob fell. The militia quickly retreated and barricaded themselves inside the courthouse, which the mob then set ablaze. A few people escaped through the side windows, but most tried to run through the mob and were killed. Those who had unfairly treated the blacks over the years, such as corrupt magistrates and leaders of the local parish, became particular targets. The so-called rebellion spread to the surrounding plantations, but only lasted a few days, and fewer than 100 white people would be killed. However, Governor Irie's reaction was swift and brutal. Hundreds of blacks, most innocent bystanders, were rounded up and executed by firing squads or hangings, most without any sort of trial. "We slaughtered all before us, man, woman, or child," as one soldier recalled. They were strung up in the burnt-out archway of the Morant Bay courthouse as a warning to future trouble seekers. In the end, some 439 blacks were executed and over 1,000 of their homes were burnt down in retaliation. The most prominent figure to be executed was George William Gordon, who was many miles away in Kingston when the whole rebellion started. The execution of a member of the Jamaican Assembly led to the outrage back in England. A royal commission held an inquiry into Governor Irie's actions. Irie was subsequently removed and replaced by Sir Henry Starks, who presided over an inquiry into the rebellion and its aftermath. As a whole, Jamaica did improve somewhat under the new governor, as progress was made in the basic infrastructure of the island and the educational institutions there. There was no fear amongst the whites that another rebellion could break out at any time, which gave the blacks a sort of bargaining tool. They would not be stepped on so easily anymore. However, it also led to the British Empire to all but ban any blacks from political life and to bring an end to the Jamaican Assembly's role as the representative government of the island. Now Jamaica would be governed directly by the Crown. When the people were pushed to the breaking point, they rose up and rebelled against the authority. While at first glance it might appear that the whole rebellion was set off merely from one man being improperly incarcerated, if you look deeper, many deeper reasons appear. The poor government on the island under the leadership of Governor Irie, the desperate economic conditions of the vast majority of people on the island, and the high prices of bare necessities all led to trusting the blacks of Jamaica to the breaking point. The events in Morant Bay could have happened anywhere on the island, and only coincidence made this particular town the boiling over point for the blacks of Jamaica. Blessings guys, and thanks for joining again. It's a pleasure having you all here. If you got so far in the video, please type the word freedom in the comment section below. And once again, y'all stay blessed.